There we go. Awesome. So, sorry for a little bit delay. We had about technical difficulties. And now we also don't... Oh, there we go. Got the viewers now, too. So, welcome to episode 53, I think. And we got a few guests like Steve and Jason, who everyone knows by now. Myself, Max. And then we have Justin Lee, who is a new face on the screen. And what we're going to talk about is Kotlin. And it's actually like the biggest, not biggest, the most explicitly requested topic for the last year. So we've been waiting for it. And there's some reasons why we didn't do it until now, but Justin will tell us. Just as always, normally we have a bit of news here, but we'll keep it short. Just say Quarkus 2 is coming like this next week. Keep the feedback coming. And yeah, we'll focus on Kotlin. And I think that's it. Yeah. And as always, if you have any questions, just put a comment in chat, and we'll relay it to Justin, and he will try and answer. So, and it's apparently episode 54. Sorry, I can't count. So
it's right up on the top left corner there.
Oh, okay.
I'm just kidding, giving you a hard time.
I'm just trying to also have some failures here, just to make Justin feel better about his setup.
Exactly.
Those yeah. Anyway, post questions in the chat, and then all things will be good. So, Justin, just give a quick introduction to yourself before we get into the meat of things.
I don't know what to say. I work on the Quarkus team. It's probably the most obvious thing to start with. I've touched on a lot of different areas over the 2 years I've been working on Quarkus. I don't know.
Okay.
I did some of the dev tooling, Amazon stuff, some other bits and pieces. Most recently, I've been working on, my responsibilities include MongoDB support, which will make sense in a moment, I suppose. And also primarily of interest today is the Kotlin support. And I used to say I'm like one of the only guys working on Kotlin, but that has expanded lately, which makes me terribly happy because there's so much work to get done. But I think there's more interest and buy-in from the rest of the team these days. So I'm actually getting quite a bit of help in areas that I didn't expect to see that.
Awesome.
Which is nice.
Awesome.
But yeah, so I guess in a nutshell, that's me. We can talk about whatever.
That's you.
But...
Cool. Well, maybe... I know you had some... Well, should we give it just a quick overview why we've been hesitant on Kotlin or why it's taking this long? Just...
Sure.
Yeah.
And I hope Mark Little won't shoot me for saying some of this. I don't think I'm saying anything terribly out of bounds, but it's hard to know where that line is sometimes because it's not really to worry myself about. Kotlin is a tricky subject for Red Hat because while we are not necessarily opposed to Kotlin, it's not an officially supported language. So anything that might impinge upon support contracts, everyone gets nervous about, from management to the legal to the support teams.
Sure.
And so trying to walk that line has been tricky in a number of different ways. But I think awareness and interest is growing internally as well, in part because I think, new languages come up all the time and everyone's super excited about them for like 8 months. And then everyone goes back to Java or Python or wherever they came from. They're like, well, that was fun.
Sure.
So I think that's been part of it as well. My phone is going nuts.
Yeah.
Let me put that on Do Not Disturb.
Well, I'll say it's not just...
Anywho.
We have
so I think that's been part of it as well, is that we're,
Go ahead, Justin. I think we have a little delay.
Sorry, my Wi-Fi is a bit trash today.
Okay, Justin, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Yes.
Okay. So we had a little bit of delay. So I'll just say one thing is, yes, Red Hat for the product side, Kotlin is not a priority, but I must say, we've always from day one wanted Kotlin support in Quarkus. Like we had Java and Java and Kotlin and Scala. The Scala one that hasn't had much uptake, but Kotlin for sure has been like a big one. But besides making sure we actually had people to work on it, but I also understood there was some stuff around like GraalVM didn't support coroutines, so therefore we kind of had it as not a priority, because even if we got it, it couldn't go to native.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so there was some, like last summer, a year ago or so, I guess now, I had added some support for like Panache, which did not touch on coroutines, and that would work in native mode. But there were some issues around the coroutine support in Graal native. And as a rule, Quarkus work has to work in JVM and native mode. And so that put the brakes on some of the Kotlin support because the coroutines isn't there yet.
Exactly.
But that went
and
in
just
a few versions ago.
Yeah,
with Graal.
and just for people who don't know, Quarkus is actually a Kotlin application in
I
large
learned
part
that
of
last
what
week.
it does.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
We might change it because of other things, but it is there. So that's for anyone who has any doubt about, like, we do have interest in Kotlin. It's just there's practical stuff that just made it harder. So that's right.
So I have a philosophical question. Well, it's not really philosophical, I guess. More just a preference question. Why would a developer be interested in using Kotlin on Quarkus versus, say, using Java? Like, what would you say would be the big benefit they would get?
I love Java. I mean, I'm a Java champion. I've been doing Java since 1996. My day job is still in Java, even though I write the Kotlin support. I personally like Kotlin because it's a little bit more. The syntax is a little bit more streamlined in some cases than Java, and that's getting better with some of the later versions that we can't use yet because they're so new. But things like records, some of the new switch stuff is really kind of leveling that playing field a little bit. I still think Kotlin syntax is a little bit more succinct in a lot of ways. And for all the IntelliJ IDEA fans out there, especially the new converts, this is how I usually describe it when I speak at conferences. If you've ever been using IntelliJ, which is also designed by JetBrains, every once in a while you'll run into a feature that is just so well done and so clean and elegant. You're like, how did I live without that? And why didn't I know about that before? I feel that way about the Kotlin language sometimes and how the standard API is built out. There's just some really nice, especially when you're talking about what would be Java streams, but they're in Kotlin streams. They don't have a name for it in Kotlin. They're just lists and sequences. Those APIs are pretty nice. I think the syntax around lambdas is a lot more streamlined than it is in Java, especially. There are weird things. All the Kotlin people know this, but in Kotlin, if you have a lambda and it's the last parameter of a function, you can actually move it outside of the parentheses, which makes defining DSLs cleaner, and also it just makes the code read cleaner when you don't have to wrap everything in parentheses, brace, and then arrow, and it's just slimmer on the screen in many ways. So for me, I still prefer it. But like I said, my day job is in Java. I have some open source projects that I maintain for people, and those are all in Java. Well, one of them is Java, the rest are in Kotlin. The main project's in Java. All the support stuff is in Kotlin now. But yeah, I like both. I think if you're using Java and you're happy with Java, there's probably not a whole lot of reason to switch because switching languages is a lot of work. But if you're starting a new project, and in the world of microservices, who isn't starting a new project these days? Kotlin's a great choice. I think it's it's fun to write. It's easy to read most of the time.
And by the way, just another thing. So Kotlin also, well, this might just be a perception thing, but most Kotlin projects, I assume, also likes to use Gradle, whereas in Java world, it's probably the other way around.
Yeah, the Kotlin community really has veered toward Gradle, and I think that's driven in part because Android is built using Gradle.
Yes.
And so by default, when people branch out away from Android, they just use Gradle because that's what they're already using.
Yeah. What I was going to say.
So.
Yeah. What I was going to say is that the Gradle support also has moved a lot in the last couple of months on Quarkus. So if you came in and using Quarkus, let's say a year ago, yes, you would have a rough ride in both the Kotlin and bumpy ride. Let's call that in Gradle and Kotlin. You could do stuff, but there was some stuff you couldn't. But I think we are down to right now. The only thing you can't do with Gradle is actually easily write a Quarkus extension. But that we know what to fix there, so that's coming too. So all this stuff has moved greatly in the last. I don't know. It's like feels like 5 or 6 releases. Things have been.
It's been a busy time.
Up. Yeah, you've been doing stuff. So maybe we talked enough philosophy and why didn't we do this sooner? How about you show us what you can do? You had some little demo you wanted to do.
Yeah, it's a very.
Can I share screen?
Yes.
I'll
it
share
should
the
just
screen.
be my
There you
IDE.
go.
All right.
Yes.
So that's my IDE.
There we go.
So this is a very basic demo. I want to go in too deeply because hopefully most of us on the video have seen Quarkus before. So I won't dive into some of the details, but of course, if you have questions, we can talk about whatever you want. So this is a basic REST resource. Now, what I did differently here is this is actually using REST Easy Reactive for reasons which will become a little bit more obvious in a moment. But I'm also using Panache on top of MongoDB. And I use MongoDB because I know it better and it's slightly easier to test. But if you've ever written a REST service before, this will all look very simple and very familiar. You have your standard, your functions. This is a hello world. You have your path, plain text. We can inject our repository types from Panache, if you're familiar. And I'll go a little bit into Panache because maybe not everyone has seen Panache, and it's kind of interesting. And there are some differences with the Kotlin support for those of you who are familiar with Panache.
I'm actually not I know Kotlin, but I don't know Kotlin. So what is late init bar? Just I want to learn something here.
Okay, fair enough. So if you've ever looked from the outside in at Kotlin, what everyone usually talks about, it's so great, it's so awesome, is the Nullable type system, right? So what happens is this person repository, let me just rename this so that it's a little bit more distinct. So this repository field is of type person repository, and it can never be null, right? You can never, ever be null. Because if we want it to be null, we'd have to add the question mark. And the question mark says this reference might be null, and you need to check it before you use it, okay? And that's where the nullability, the type safety comes in. But we don't want it to be null because we're going to inject it, right? So it'll never be null because Arc will inject it for us. So we take that question mark off. However, if I don't initialize it to a variable, then how can it ever be not null, right? We have to give it a value, but I'm going to inject it. I don't have a value. Okay. Arc is going to give it to me.
So it's like it's like a semi-final.
Exactly. So Kotlin has this escape hatch, if you will, a pressure valve called late init. And what that lets it do is it tells the compiler, I know I said this is nullable, not null, and I know I'm not giving it a value, but trust me, by the time anyone uses it, someone will set that value, set that field to a value. In this case, because we're injecting, Arc will do it. So this just tells the compiler, don't worry about missing a value. It's going to get
that. So ALCOS had a nice like. So why not just using constructor injection? Because then you didn't have to do that, right?
You could. That's certainly an option. I didn't hear because that's just not typically how resources are written. But you could do constructor injection as well.
Injection, yeah.
I've done it elsewhere. Honestly, when writing a resource, the last thing I ever think about is a constructor because it's just just there, right?
But there are ways. Yeah. So we support both basically. So yeah.
Just for grins, if we were to show what that would look like, it would probably look something like this, unless I mess something up. So you can do that. And then whenever REST Easy and everything makes the
then it's there.
In fact, no, we would want to inject it because the constructor. So that's what it would look like with the constructor injection.
Cool.
And that's
we saved it.
Kotlin. What's that?
Yeah, I'm saying we saved 10 characters, so that's good.
Yeah, exactly. For those who don't know Kotlin, that's a constructor right there. And because it says var, it's a field on the type, as opposed to just a constructor parameter. So if it doesn't have val or var on it, it'll be around for the constructor, and then it'll be gone, and you can't use it. And if I still have any references to it, I don't use it. So as you can see down here, if I tried to reuse repository, I get
nothing.
It turns red because it doesn't know what it is. But I can add var, and now it knows what it is. So
cool, awesome.
Short little Kotlin lesson. I'm going to get this back to where that was. Okay, so anyways, that's late in it. All right, so the rest of this is pretty standard REST services, only written in Kotlin. We're returning a string type out of the hello world. Now, the interesting thing here about Panache is, let's take a look at person. Now, with Panache, for those of you who are not familiar, it's a interface layer on top of your Hibernate or Mongo entities that adds the active record or the repository pattern to your types. So in this case, if we wanted to use the repository pattern, we define a class repository person, and then we extend this type, and those are the type parameters. Now, in this case, where we're extending the base because we want to change the type of the ID. If we wanted to use the standard, in this case, it's MongoDB, so the standard ID type is object ID instead of long, so we could do this. And then that'll give us a repository where we can query with a find by ID and pass in an object ID reference, for example, in a ton of other functions that we'll look at momentarily. But in this case, we're using a long because we can. Down here, if we want to use the active record pattern, we extend Panache entity base. And now I do want to point out, I know I'm using Mongo, but the JPA API looks exactly the same. There's just not a Mongo in the name. So it'd be Panache repository base, Panache entity base, for example, or Panache entity. So same deal here. If we just did Panache entity, import that. What that does is it gives us some built-in stuff. So we automatically get an ID of object ID. And so this, as you can see, it complains because it's redundant. It's shadowing the field above. And if we look at the type, I don't have the sources downloaded. So you can see it defines for us a field of object ID, and we get a toString automatically. I don't think it's going to like to download the sources. It doesn't matter. But we're going to use base just for symmetry. Now, what's different in Kotlin versus Java is that in Java, you'd be done. You'd extend the entity or the entity base, and you'd be done. And because all these functions are defined, a lot of them are defined as static methods, and you just use them off the type because Java and static has a weird relationship, and it just works. Kotlin gets a little trickier because you cannot reference a static member of a Java type based on a subtype. Kotlin does not allow that because syntactically it's weird, and even Java will complain. It just lets you do it because it's still visible. But Kotlin does not allow that. So what we had to do is break out those static members because Kotlin doesn't support static. We had to break those out into a companion object, which is defined for every entity in your system if you go with the active record. So here we're going to find our companion object, and we're going to extend Panache Mongo companion. And there's also Panache Mongo companion base that takes two types, the entity type and the object type. And now this, well, that looks better actually. So this is the companion base. So when you're using the active record approach, you get a ton of methods. And rather than scroll down, because there's a bunch of them, I'm going to try this. And hopefully that's readable on everyone's video screens. I know it can get tricky sometimes. So these are all the methods that Panache will give you for free on your entities. You can list and you can give it a query. You can pass in a document for the query because that's how Mongo queries. You can pass in, there's a more of a kind of a JPA style query string you can use, I think with Mongo. I'm sorry, it takes a string form of a document for Mongo queries. Anyways, you can find, you can pass sort parameters. There's a ton of them. You can stream it if you want like a Java util stream sort of interface. This is a Kotlin stream. You can get all of them. You can get all of them sorted, count, delete. You can save, you can update. You can save or update depending on what's going on. And there's just a whole bunch. So Panache will actually generate these methods for you and you get them for free. So you don't have to write write a find by ID query because it's here for you. And we generate that for you at compile time. Now you are override any of these that you want, and Panache will not touch those. So if you want a custom find all, for example, and you want to elide some of the response from your results, you can write your own query here and find all, and then filter out whatever it is that you don't want. And Panache will leave that. But if you don't define a find all, Panache will generate one for you. So what that looks like in practice then is we can come into our resource. And so in our endpoint where we go to create a person, we're going to post it. We'll see the test in a second, but it's standard rest assured test for the most part. So we're going to post a person to this endpoint, and then taking that person instance, we just call persist on it. And just to drive the point home, there is no persist method defined here, but it is defined on the Panache entity base. So we can just call it, and Panache knows how to pass it off to Mongo, get the results. It does not, however, update the instance, which I learned the other day, which is a little annoying. So instead we have to go find it first because we want the ID that's generated. Typically in the Mongo driver, the document itself is updated, but that change in the document is not retrofitted. It's not pushed back to the person object itself, so we have to go find it. I feel like that's a bug, and it might be just my misunderstanding of what's happening there, but we'll get there. And as you can see here, we're calling find all on the person type and not the reference type, or the reference variable. Little person find all. We can also, if we were using the person repository, we could do repository.find all. So if you've used Panache with Java, with Kotlin, it works, like I said, it works exactly the same way. You're just using Kotlin syntax, and the companion stuff is slightly different because of the way that the language works. Now, the fun part about 2.0, which is not out yet, but CR3 is out. Is CR4 out yet? I haven't seen. I don't think CR4 is out yet.
CR3, as far as I remember.
I think it's still CR3. But as of, I think it went in before CR1, but as of 2.0, we now have coroutine support with our REST easy stuff. And this one has been a long time coming. And I was just as frustrated as most of the rest of you, but we finally got it done because we had GraalVM support finally. So what does that look like? Let's go take a look at our tests. Now,
so was the main reason for the coroutine just the GraalVM, or was there more to it?
Initially it was GraalVM, and that was a convenient excuse because I had a lot on my plate.
Sure.
But and also I think some of the REST easy stuff. It wasn't until like REST easy reactive came along that it made it simpler to add in.
It was hard to do before.
Right, exactly. And so certainly once REST easy reactive landed, it was an easier foundation to build on.
Got it.
So there was a couple of missing pieces, and also a lot of it was just timing, trying to get around to it.
Awesome.
But it's here and it's good to go.
Cool.
So if we just look at the exact test that was generated. Maybe the text has changed differently. This is literally just when you go to code.quarkus.io and create yourself a project, this is what gets generated. And we can run our endpoint if everything cooperates with me today.
Well, you're so lucky. Everything works on your side, so that's good.
Everything's been working today, so I don't know why this wouldn't.
Oh, yeah.
I was doing this demo the other day, and while this is building, and I've got nothing else to do, I was explaining to the audience, like, sometimes the demo gods are not kind, and so I was pulling a Rachel Ray, you know, like, here's all the prep work, and then like, oh, here's the finished product over here, just in case things broke. But as you can see, it fires up. Let me get that guy out of the way. It ran. It took 4 seconds and 112 milliseconds. A lot of that was build time. So that's our standard test, and this was hello world. Now, if you want to use a coroutine for your endpoint, it's as simple as that. Now, when you invoke the endpoint, it gets invoked off in a coroutine, and it goes off and does all of the coroutine magic on the Kotlin side of the world. And in theory, you can scale to the heavens with such code. And if we were to run it again, it'll just work. Now, I pointed out that I was using REST Easy earlier because it gets important here. But I do want to point out that just because it says reactive in the module name does not necessarily mean that you're committing to using something like Mutiny or coroutines or whatever. Because as you'll notice, when we first ran this function, it was just a normal Kotlin function. There was nothing asynchronous or suspended or anything about it. It just ran. REST Easy Reactive is smart enough to know the difference between what's what. Now, if you were to use a reactive type and return like a uni string or whatever out of this, REST Easy Reactive would just work. I'm not a reactive developer personally, so I'm not going to demo that because I will mangle it. It'll look terrible and it'll be my fault. We have people in the team that use it and love it, and they are the better resources for that sort of work.
And I think Ale actually has the same question as me. So is this? Oh, he's asking, does this still use a worker thread like blocking, or does suspend function run directly in Vertex IO threads? I think it's the latter.
It should not be blocking anymore. When it initially went in, there was some conversation about like it's still using the blocking, blah blah blah. But we actually had I think a user contributed the fix to that, which is really exciting. It did not take long after this particular feature set went in that we had several contributions from our users on how to clean this up or add this or tweak that, which is really gratifying to see.
So because I know in Java, you would put a blocking annotation on it, either on the class or something, to say this is still blocking. But are you saying in Kotlin you don't need to block it? It just looks at whether it's a coroutine or not, and then it decides? Or
in this case, yes. You could probably still use blocking. I'm not familiar with that particular annotation.
Sure.
You could use app blocking. I think app blocking is probably is it a descriptive thing, or I don't think it has any actual impact. I think it's just a documenting.
So if you put app blocking, what it will do is that's when it'll kick off to the worker thread. So in the case of coroutines, you don't want to put app blocking on there, because how coroutines are implemented internally, like in Java, is a little bit different. So like that's why Graal compiler took a long time to get the feature. Is it's like when you compile your bytecode, all your like flow control stuff, like your ifs, your if statements and your loops and all that kind of stuff. In the bytecode, it looks more like go-to kind of statements, right? So it looks like go-to kind of statements. And then, so what the Graal compiler would do is it would actually like reverse like what the go-to statements were to what the original Java code was. So if it was like, oh, this is a for loop, I know it's a for loop. But with coroutines, it's trickier because coroutines, you have this notion where your flow control can go in and out, back and forth, because it's like it goes as far as it can, then it blocks, then it's got to return right away, and then it needs to pick up where it left off, right? So that's the power of the coroutines, is that you can run them right in your IO thread, and essentially you don't have a worker instance being executed, which means you don't have to tune the worker pool for your environment. So Quarkus, we try to tune it for you, but there's still a factor we can't predict, which is exactly what type of usage pattern are you doing? Like how much waiting are you doing? Like is it a slow database? Is it a fast database? And that kind of thing. So when you get into that stuff, you have to tune it. But with a coroutine, you don't, because it just needs memory state to hold on to. So that'd be like the really big advantage why you'd want to do it. So yeah.
So just curious. So it sounds like in Kotlin we are because the Kotlin has the feature built into language. We can be a bit smarter about it. You don't have to use explicit blocking or not blocking.
Yeah, I'm not, like I said, I'm not a reactive guy for a number of reasons. But the biggest one is like I use Kotlin when I can, and I think development using coroutines is cleaner than the reactive APIs, because a single call can get very verbose with the reactive API. Now, I will say before all the reactive fans fire up their torches and grab their, machetes or whatnot, it's not 100%. There are things that reactive APIs are better for in Kotlin and coroutines. It's not a complete replacement. I will acknowledge that. Yeah. But I do think they're cleaner when you can use something like coroutines versus a reactive API. It's cleaner for me
for
personally.
Sure. Yeah.
But whatever works for you, do it, right? It's not going to bother me one way or
another. And I think that's we say it very often, but I think people always think, Quarkus is only reactive or it only is semi. But you can go full reactive, or you can stay fully blocking, or you can do a mix in between. As much as you kind of whatever fits your use case and your development team, you can do.
And in fact, in this one REST service, you can see we have a suspended one, we have a non-suspended one, and REST Easy Reactive just knows the difference. But I did want to point this one last thing before we just move on to like random questions and exploratory stuff. Just to prove that we're actually in a coroutine, I added a delay. That's like the canonical test for coroutines is delay and see what happens. So we're going to delay for 5 seconds, which is an eternity when you're doing webinars, but it drives the point home. Just to show that there is a coroutine context going on behind the scenes for you. And it'll run. There, that one took 8 seconds to run, and almost 9 seconds to run with the delay.
Cool.
Just to show that it really is there, and we're not, trying to pull a fast one. Anyways, there was a thought scroll by. I don't know if anyone saw it. It's still here. Reactive client. There is a REST reactive client API as well, also that allows coroutines. I think Stuart actually, when I did this work, I got like 80%, 90% of the work done to get the coroutine bits working, but it needed some work on the REST Easy side of the API to make it cleaner so that we weren't like directly binding to Kotlin stuff. And so he reworked the API to allow kind of a SPI sort of interface so we can optionally pull in coroutines. And in fact, if you just import REST Easy Reactive, you will not get coroutine support. You actually have to have Kotlin included, right? Which kind of makes sense. Yeah. But then the only thing extra you have to do is just include a Kotlin dependency. And then once REST Easy Reactive starts looking at your endpoints, it'll see that it's a suspend function and it'll wire it up for coroutine support.
Yeah.
Anyways, all that to say is once Stuart saw that, he knew enough, I guess, to go do the client side of it all and got the client version built, I think, virtually overnight. I was in bed and I woke up the next day and it was there.
That's what happens. Works. No, so the REST Easy client is actually it's not fully documented yet, but yes, we have a fully REST Easy Reactive client now, which is pretty nice.
Documentation is definitely lagging, but that's kind of always the case, sadly.
So, and by the way, I think Dominic is he's asking about the C drivers, not the client. And not the...
Yeah, exactly. I saw that. I wanted to diverge because I knew that question comes up. Max is probably a better one to answer about R2 DBC because that has kind of a long twisted story behind it.
Sure. Well, I'm not even sure I have the full things I'm moving, but I think if he's asking for reactive drivers, they do exist. Like we have the Vertex clients for all the different databases we support. So I'm not sure what.
Do we support Oracle, JDBC? I don't think we support Oracle.
So
Yeah,
Oracle is the one standing out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's in progress.
Yes.
But if you're using a nice open source database, you could use it. I think what this question's about is if you have something that doesn't have a reactive driver, is there a wrapper that would kick off routines to a thread pool? I actually don't know the answer to that question. I don't know if we've created something like that, partly because we were trying to ensure that we could do reactive from the top layer of the stack all the way down through. So we've been trying to ensure everything has like reactive capabilities. But we could get back to you, maybe comment on the YouTube or something.
We can say that we have the different clients. We have highly reactive who can do it. There are some conversations going on about the Oracle driver, which I hope we will be able to show. But we know it's doable. It's the same with Kotlin. Like things doesn't happen overnight. It'll take a bit of time. So it is in progress. So I would say it looks much better than before. But basically, if you use any open source database, or even we even have Microsoft
because their driver's open.
So, yeah.
Drivers.
Right.
So we were able to get support for that.
Yeah. So that's not the exact same concept as the RT2 template does in Spring, but we have all the data access you kind of need, I think. But it'll improve over time.
Yeah, you can fall back to the app blocking thing we were talking about, right? So like if you wanted to use, that doesn't quite fit in with the coroutine example to some extent. But if you really want it, something to get you by, you could use an app blocking thing. And I don't know if we mentioned it or not, but the REST Easy Reactive actually will, if you do accidentally put a blocking call into the IO thread, it'll actually detect it, and then it will throw a nice little warning for you.
It wins loudly. I saw that a lot. We're working on this. It will tell you like this took a second and a half, and that's not good. And it's a very large log message that's very hard to miss.
And then I say, Elcos just saying, what reactive is good for. Stream of values and async like sync with suspend is cleaner. Yes. Yeah. I think that's better. Agreed. But yeah. All right. You got anything else, Justin? Or you want to?
As far as what to kind of show off, that's sort of it. That's one of the nice things about Kotlin is like if you know the rest of the system, you just write your code in Kotlin. But these are kind of the two big points, at least code-wise, to show. In terms of, I guess the big question is like, well, what's next? After my goal was after I did REST Easy Reactive was to do reactive messaging with some of the Kafka stuff. But again, we had a user beat me to it. So we had a user contributed code to get that working. I think it actually there's a kind of a Mutiny / coroutine bridge API that he's actually using. But you can write reactive messages in Kotlin now, which is awesome.
So just for me again, for me to understand the delta between. So once we have it in the Java version, I assume you can use it from Kotlin. It just might not be nice. So what we're doing is just adding like glue code to make it, like you said, like you couldn't access static, therefore you had to have a companion.
Right, exactly. Well, so in general, if Quarkus supports it, you can write your code in Kotlin. And I think you can actually probably say that for anything that's in Quarkus today, you can use it in Kotlin. Now, there might be some places there that aren't true. The big sticking point will be if you want native image, and that can get a little bit dicier. But I think everything that we have in there today works in native image as well. So if you have a third-party extension, your luck will probably vary. But Kotlin was written to interact with the JVM. So if you're just in JVM mode, you can probably do anything you want to do in Kotlin on top of Quarkus. There was a few places like with Panache where like literally the language got in the way with some of the static bits. And obviously with the coroutines, there's some infrastructure inside of Quarkus that needed to happen in reactive messaging. Most of the big points there are probably done. I have to go check the list, but for the most part, it's there. The next big thing I think for me to tackle, there's a request for using Kotlin serialization. Is a big request. So it's using JSON. And for the non-Kotlin people watching, the obvious question is, why does Kotlin have its own serialization? That seems dumb. The answer to that is Kotlin targets 3 platforms: the JVM, JavaScript, and LLVM. So you can actually write Kotlin code that compiles straight to machine code or LLVM code. So think iPhones, desktop apps, things like that. What gets tricky there is they want to have one coding paradigm that works across all platforms. And for the most part, that works, but there's a few places where it gets trickier. Serialization is one, because JavaScript serialization is its own set of black magic that no one really understands, I don't think. And then things like dates, JavaScript, I don't think even supports dates. So Kotlin has its own date library. So you have the same API across all 3 platforms, and then it just compiles down as appropriate based on your build. So that's the same story with Kotlin serialization, is they wanted to have the same API that you could write as a Kotlin user. And if you're writing like a multi-platform, multi-module sorts of thing, like you want to be able to write like one set of common code on the back end, for example, and then if you're streaming information out to your iPhone, you want to be able to then consume that via Kotlin on your device, and that serialization has to match. So Kotlin serialization.
Is the Kotlin serialization safer than the Java one?
That is a fine question. I don't know the answer to that one. I would hope, I would kind of hope it is. The very nature of serialization itself is fraught with dangers, because you're taking user data off the internet, wrapping it up into hopefully safe objects and shoving it further into your system. Yeah. So there's going to be inherent risks to that regardless, I think.
Yeah, don't do it. I think if you're writing microservices, stay away from serialization. And it's like,
yeah, exactly. I think the big difference is, I had to look at it. Kotlin serialization uses a text format, so something more akin to JSON or whatever, whereas Java serialization is literally the bytes out of memory dumped to disk, and then it's like pulled back into memory and like reconstituted as an object. And that, of course, has all sorts of problems with it. So I think in that respect, it almost has to be safer, because I can't think of anything more dangerous than just taking a bunch of bytes and
it sounds like it's like externalized serialization, not like literally binary.
Right.
So I have a question about that then, because I'm not very familiar with Kotlin's serialization thing. Do you like subset like a part of the API, or do you have like a validation thing that comes in? So is it kind of like a Jackson would map to it, so you get your request comes in, and then you can say like, oh, I could do some validation. I could say this is within expected range or whatever, and throw the data out of it.
I haven't looked at it in a while. The last time I looked at it, the last time I looked at it was pre 1.0, because I've been busy with everything else. So I don't know the answer to that question offhand.
Okay, yeah, just curious. It'd be interesting to kind of compare like, because like I would encourage everybody to like use REST if you can, and then unless you're doing like a messaging protocol, then of course you're going to be using a custom messaging based protocol, of course. But if you're doing like REST JSON, that's like the best programming model, because then you could change your implementation, right? So you could go with Kotlin, and then maybe like over time you're like, oh, maybe I want to do some pieces of that in Java and pieces of it in Kotlin for whatever reason. If you keep the format the same, you can kind of switch things back and forth really easily, versus having an implementation specific serialization mechanism.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Cool. So Kotlin serialization is on the map, and also for those who've really been following Quarkus development, a while back, Hibernate Reactive went in, which I think is still experimental on their end of the world, but there's no Kotlin support for that yet either. Even though there is Hibernate Panache Kotlin, there's no Hibernate Reactive Panache Kotlin yet, because that API just didn't exist when I was creating it, when I did the others. So I have to go back and fix that.
Can you say that 3 times fast?
Hibernate Reactive Panache. Probably. We'll do that offline in the blooper reel or something. But yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. But fortunately, for a while it felt like I was kind of the only guy doing stuff, and that's not true. There's like a Quarkus Kotlin module that I did not write. There are a number of other guys on the team who've been very interested in Kotlin, but they've had other responsibilities, and primarily it's been my responsibility to do it. And it was just kind of their, like, I'm here, so why not do it, sort of a thing.
So anyone who wants to see more Kotlin in Quarkus, what do they do? Call you and say run faster?
Yeah, exactly. send me hate mail. Why don't you work harder? No, there is. If you go to the GitHub issues, there is I think a project board for Kotlin stuff. It's probably due for some pruning. It might be a little bit out of date, but there's a list of things to do. I think so. That'd be a good place to look. And just to finish the thought earlier, I just wanted to say that a lot of the other teams getting a lot more active in tackling some of these things. Some of the things get fixed before I get a chance to get to them, which is fantastic. I think as a team, we're getting more comfortable. Now that we kind of know, like, when you add Kotlin to the mix, these are the things that break in terms of like the build and concerns to worry about in terms of publishing and things like that. Like, we know what a lot of those pain points are now, and we have things in place to make them not an issue. So from my perspective, it seems like a lot more of the team is a lot more eager to just jump in and say, I'm gonna add this real quick, or I'm gonna touch that up or whatever. So it's picking up pace, which is great. There it is. There's the roadmap thing.
Yeah, no, I also think just the fact that, you know, the main reason for using Kotlin for us was the coroutines, and now it's there. All the other small syntax, it was like, sure, but that's not a big win. But no. But what I'm hearing from you is that you now deem Quarkus 100% good for Kotlin, because and there might be a few things, but most stuff is there. Or that's okay.
Yeah, as long as you're in JVM mode, I think I go nuts. Use Kotlin everywhere you can, and if you find a place where you hit some sort of wrinkle, then certainly file an issue and let us know. I would like to think that those are pretty rare these days, especially if you're just running in JVM mode.
How about not like just remind about it on the one thing is the hot reload thing. There's something about hot reload not working well in Kotlin.
That does work. I in the demo that I did a while back, I showed that. But yeah, hot reload works. Dev mode works. There's a new in 2.0. If for those of you who haven't seen it, there's a new continuous testing mode where you can start your test and they just run, and every time you change your test, it reruns and it just continually churns every time you save. That works for Kotlin.
Cool.
Yeah, it should all work.
And I can see go ahead.
Hobby. Hobby. Thanks for the kind words. It's working out for you. It's been a goal of mine for a while to make Kotlin work well. But I did want to talk about one of the biggest outstanding issues that I'm working right now is Kotlin 1.5 support, which is not that trivial to upgrade to. It gets trickier because it's sort of coupled in with the Java 16 support, which is unfortunate.
The which, sorry? What was connected to Java 16?
16.
Yeah, it's connected
Kotlin
to
1.5. Kotlin 1.5 and Java 16. They become somewhat intertwined, which I'm trying to separate those out. Java 16 support, I don't think is going to happen for Kotlin for a while because there are libraries from inside.
Okay, I mean, so you, the issue is not that Kotlin 1.5 is using Java 16. It's that Quarkus, we're trying to be compatible with Java 16, but we can't with the Kotlin stuff. Yes.
We can if we add like the all opens module directive thing, which kind of defeats the purpose to a certain extent. But that might just be how it has to work until JetBrains fixes this internal stuff. I don't know what else is in there, but it complains a lot if you don't have those modules in there. So
gotcha.
Yeah, I'm wrapping that support up. There was a weird bytecode change that happened that broke some panache stuff that I'm trying to resolve, but it's almost done.
Okay. So as long as you're on Java 16 and lower, then or between Java 11 and 16, 15 and lower. Sorry.
Yeah.
Then you're good. Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
and our I think it's important though, like because we're talking about the like the gaps and the future things that we could improve, and so we rely on your feedback to figure out like which of these things is the most important to work on. I'm not sure if you mentioned that, Justin, but it's like, but I'm sure you probably would really like it if people helped, commented.
I have a long list of things. If you look at that roadmap, you can see there's a number of issues to tackle. I generally I tackle them in order that I think is the most important based on my involvement and awareness of the Kotlin community. But certainly if there are particular issues that are more important than others, then file issues, upvote issues, let us know. Because priority wise, like we want to get it all done. It's just a question of which one gets done first that has the greatest impact. And a lot of that will be driven by user input.
okay. I went blank. The thing I wanted to say was I heard you did something else in Kotlin. You made Kotlin aware the other day. What was that?
I did. So there's this amazing project written by the most genius man I've ever met called JBang, and it lets you use Java. It lets you use Java as a scripting language. Basically, you can write your script in Java and it just runs. But I'm a Kotlin guy, and I had a project and I wanted to write mine in Kotlin. So I added Kotlin support to JBang. So now you can write your JBang scripts in Kotlin, and it works smashingly.
And you can even use the stuff you've shown here, the Quarkus Kotlin with the JBang one, and it's actually now I actually go like, hey, and now I need to try and learn Kotlin a bit more because I need to get it to work.
It is a lovely language.
That's good.
It's
That's good. But this is a fun just to end on a philosophical question here. Like David says, he's very comfortable writing Kotlin code, but I think a big issue is that most of the backend library are built around Java. Then Kotlin needs to adapt and limit some of the features to working. And this is the that's one of the big struggles I have with any kind of language that comes up, is that when we are moving the platform of Java forward, and if you just look at from Java 8 to Java 16, there's a ton of stuff there, and we tend to choose Java libraries because then we know that they'll continue to work and they'll evolve with the language, whereas stuff that's tied to Kotlin becomes tricky for us. But on the flip side, people who are in Kotlin are like, why can't every Java library out there just be Kotlin, because then everything is good? But that's just not feasible. Like there'll be a battle. And there's for those who don't know, but there's one that always comes up is the HTTP. What's it called? The HTTP client, and they have HTTP, excellent Java library. We use it a ton of places until Java 11 has a decent one. But they from version 3 to 4 they went to a Kotlin route, and suddenly that drags in a dependency set on Kotlin on a whole build stuff, and no matter how much we would like to support it, it's actually a massive burden to do, even though that we would love to do it because OKCP is an excellent library. But so is
it the native stuff? Is it the native stuff that gets tricky?
Well, the thing is that there's OKCP it's built in Kotlin, and therefore it needs the Kotlin standard library. So therefore, if you want to productize it, you need to be able to rebuild the Kotlin library. You have to have Kotlin. So it's this chicken egg thing, right? You're back to now you have to be relying on the non-OpenJDK based compiler, etc. So it becomes all fun, right? So I just want to we definitely want to make Kotlin as good as we can in Quarkus land, and I think we've shown, and you've shown today, that it's there, and there's people who've been using it since forever.
A year and a half. It's amazing.
And as I said, the Quarkus app was a Kotlin app from I think day one. So we've been using it. So we are using it, but there are just time constraints and stuff can make things, funny as anything else.
So it's kind of a nice use case when you talk about the Code Quarkus app, because you could do front end type stuff with Kotlin, because you're mentioning Kotlin does JavaScript compilation, so you could have both your back end and your front end implemented in Kotlin. That's kind of a nice value add. And then I imagine that would be we're talking about Kotlin serialization or before. That's probably like where the value comes in, is you can easily pass between JavaScript and
Right. I've seen
and Kotlin service.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's cool stuff to be able to do that. So I think it's like the interesting thing is when you have all those Java libraries in Quarkus, like it's pretty like we sometimes in some cases we have to add bridges, like that comment was just saying. But it also means we have functionality that can be mapped, right? Because if we have all the core capabilities that Kotlin needs, then it's just a matter of like having time from somebody to contribute that bridging layer. And then you get all that feature set. Whereas if you go like a Kotlin pure universe, you're always going to be limited to, their bindings. This is sort of a universal problem, whether it's on Quarkus or somewhere else. So someone has to write a bridge for Java libraries, right? Unless there's a Kotlin version already out there.
And that's one of my favorite things about Kotlin, is that for the most part, you can use any Java library you want. And Panache is the notable example, just because it uses static in a way that Kotlin does not support.
Yeah. And I just wish it was the other way around. That from Java there would be a nice Kotlin interface, but there isn't. Sometimes.
Yeah.
So that's good. Okay. Well, that was a very quiet. We got a few questions. Very thanks for that. But everyone seemed to be happy with Kotlin. Everything's awesome. So that's great.
I hope
we
so.
now got it. Yeah. Well, good job, Justin.
File an issue if you run into something, and just let us know.
That'd be cool. Okay. Well, thank you, Jason, Steve. Anything from you guys on the? You have a minute left. No, all good. Well, thank you for all the questions, and Justin, thank you for being here and actually making the coroutine stuff work and all the other magic. So cool. Thank you. I'll see you around.